Today I would like to talk about the controversial scene in the novel It by Stephen King. In my discussion of It up until now, which have mostly been articles and not on this YouTube channel, I had not read any of the original book. It is very long, and the excerpts I've come across are written a bit too fantasy-y for me to want to read thousands of pages in that style, if you know what I mean. Through It excerpts, I encountered a lot of nondescript supernatural feelings, but what's going on is pretty vague in terms of the characters and their environment, of which I am not a personal fan. I don't plan on reading the whole book anytime soon, but there are some controversies that I just can't let slide around my peripheral vision. I need to know for myself. So if you're also a Stephen King fan and want to know what is up with the "we need to talk about it" scene that was cut from the It movies, stay with me. We'll review the content and I'll discuss my opinion afterwards. But if you don't already know what I'm talking about or are easily disturbed by tough topics or ambiguous actions of characters, my feelings won't be hurt if you click off now. So okay, you've had your chance. We're here to find out what the fuck is up with the It adolescent orgy scene. I found the receipts, or rather the pages in the book. I believe in the sharing of knowledge, but I also don't endorse partaking in free copyrighted material. So it is available online should you desire to read these excerpts and form your own opinions, but I will not be linking anything below the video. So, Stephen King, you've been a very controversial boy. First, let's talk about why it, or this scene specifically, hit the media so bad. To start, this made such an uproar in current years because it is easy to get outraged at the idea of this scene. When it was revisited because of the new movie adaptations, Chapter 1, 2017, and It Chapter 2, 2019, people didn't do their research. I'll be honest, I think that there is a growing flaw in our society where fans, be it creators, news agencies, magazines, or just other individuals, choose a side blindly. That's how things get misconstrued and exaggerated. In this mentality, they kind of justify their blind allegiance with not wanting to give the offensive topic the time of day. They deem it unworthy to absorb and form their own opinion because it is toxic or controversial or problematic. I don't agree with that. I love Stephen King's works that I've read so far, and I needed to take the good and the bad as it may be and form my own opinion, as we all should. So I did. The It orgy scene is not an orgy scene. That is why I have put it in quotations in the title of this video. The scene is described as very dark, there's no multi-person participation or field of vision, and Beverly, the mastermind of the situation, takes each of the boys aside in turn so they can have their first sexual experience and overcome it. Reading through the couple of pages that this scene encapsulates, it's hard not to see the author's intention with this scene because King has directly written the symbolism in. Here is a passage. "And she feels the thing begin to happen, something of which the girls who whisper and giggle about sex in the girls' room have no idea, at least as far as she knows. They only marvel at how gushy sex must be, and now she realizes that for many of them sex must be some unrealized, undefined monster. They refer to the act as it." It's fairly straightforward in this single line why King felt the need to add sexual maturity into the narrative for all the young characters, lest they be condemned by fear and Pennywise would win the battle. There's two sides of the argument for including this in the new movies. Many fans commented and condemned removing the scene in the new, more graphic and mature film adaptations as kind of pussy behavior on the film company's behalf, but I'm sure we all know the physicality of the scene could never be tastefully presented. If the scene were added, it would have been solely for its shock value and boundary breaking. In King's mind, the sexual encounters, I'm going to keep saying encounters because it's hard to call it sex when they barely understand what they're doing, were a form of overcoming it. Sex is it. Pennywise, in many ways, isn't just an alien monster. It takes the form of anything the children find fearsome, and it's impossible to grow up in society, regardless of your sexual preference, without feeling the weight of sex's taboo. Sex is something unknown and scary, and in it, sex is a hurdle we all face when growing up. These kids in the throes of confusion and puberty, in King and Beverly's mind, need to free themselves of that fearful unknown before they could move on, before they could find their way out of that dark tunnel. That is the symbolism that I believe the author intended, regardless of the reality people want to emphasize. But with all things, once created, the interpretation of media will vary. I think there's a lot of things you can express in written form that cannot be done with proper representation or tact in film. This is one of them. Because, one, no matter the circumstances, no one wants to see adolescents fumble through their first sexual encounter, and two, without the movie being narrated by Beverly, there's no way to understand or accept that this was her choice. It would come off very poorly. In the novel, we get to omnipresently read her thoughts while this is happening, as well as the other boys. So let's just take a second to talk about Beverly and woman empowerment. Only in actually reading this scene, we can in any way relate to the weirdness that Beverly is forcing out of the situation. She makes up her mind, she's determined to get out of the terrible situation they're stuck in, and she convinces the boys this is the right course of action to overcome it, not just for them, but for her too. A lot of her thought process during the scene focuses on feelings of triumph, how she's overcoming a stigma, and how she's freed herself from her father's expectations. The reason I don't think this scene deserves to be written off is because there's a lot of merit in the underlying symbolism we already discussed, and because it's not presented in a vulgar way. There's a difference between a sexual act and sexualizing a child. The start of the scene is introduced with the same adolescent innocence they would have. Quote, "You have to put your thing in me," she says. End quote. As I mentioned, readers explicitly follow Beverly's train of thought and how this is something consensual. Her decision, so it can't be misconstrued as rape, but it's also presented as an intimate exchange rather than a sexually explicit one. This is best described when Eddie and Beverly start. Beverly thinks to herself, this is Eddie, this is her friend, this is something they're doing to get out of the situation, this is what they're doing to overcome it together. What I honestly wasn't expecting from this scene was for it to come off a bit, sweet. It's not just a rite of passage, it's a bond and friendship being strengthened between Beverly and each of them individually. Sex becomes something that you share rather than something that you take. It was also not quite as awkward as I expected. I was okay with the start of it, but I'm glad that King did not dwell on this scene. The whole scene is about 5 pages long. It's not a page per kid as the idea is set up, so each encounter can be glossed over until they end up on Ben, who Beverly actually comes to like, and Bill she shares a strong bond with. They all collect themselves after the experience, feeling less disoriented by it and being lost in the tunnels, and go on their way. I was okay with the representation of awkward, fumbling adolescents' attempts at sex. I was a little uncomfortable at the end when Beverly started to enjoy it. I'm not slut-shaming, I already said I understand this is a bonding experience, but no matter how empowered she got from the release of social stigma, I think it should have just stuck with that kind of release. That's the gray area that I think we should be focusing on. Not the ages of the kids, but the representation of their first sexual encounters. It should not be sexy to read, and it isn't. I have no right to hate on kids' sex drives. I know that they do it that young. I just stand firmly on not sexualizing them through the awkward experience they're trying to overcome to escape a fear-eating alien. If you read it before or after the controversy hit the media in the last couple years, comment on how you felt about it. Was the scene too far? Should it have been left out? Was King justified because the symbolism and cohesive theme? It feels like this scene gets brought up in media every, not quite a decade, but it continuously pops up, more or less because of the concept of it is not present in a lot of other media. This one is very well known because it's by Stephen King, and our understanding of what is and isn't acceptable and how society's mentality has shifted over the years starts to interpret it differently. When I first heard about this scene, I was young and, obviously probably about the age of the kids in this, and I was like, oh god. Oh, please ignore the fire trucks if you just heard them. I'm in BC, and there's wildfires, and everything is scary. So the first time I heard about the controversy of this scene, I was about the age of the characters in it, and the general consensus of all the adults I was hearing about it was, this is irredeemable, I can't believe he could even, pretend to write something like that. although if they had read it, the symbolism would have been quite clear. For them, sex was a taboo in general more than just the fact that it was inappropriate for the age of the characters. Sex was pretty frowned upon in any form of media, unless you had the raunchy tag, you know? Then it came to the sheltered children sort of years. The controversy came back, and it was more about the age of the children. Like, we see that children are starting to sexually mature faster, and we do not want to endorse it, so they came at King, who does represent it, although the way in which he represents it and the text in which it is represented is completely inaccessible to the ages of the characters in it. It's not like we were fucking 13 years old reading it and going like, wow, that made me horny, I should go have sex. And then in more recent years, I think before the last movies came out, I did see some controversy coming up again because it was being revised, that there was this new spin on it where Beverly was a master manipulator, and it wasn't about the boys taking advantage of her or even the display of adolescent sex in the first place. It was that she was a harlot, and it was not okay for her to do them because we'd hit the point of sympathizing with the boys more. Everybody wasn't just giving a thumbs up to any boy that got laid at 13, even if he got laid by a cougar. We realized that was bad. Overall, I found it very interesting how the interpretation and narrative of this scene has been interpreted over the many years that it has existed. I read an article or two while researching this controversy, and a lot of people missed the point of the scene, but there were other voices of dissection that are both respectable and I think are very interesting. Not that Beverly was necessarily a harlot, but one writer advocated that Beverly's peer pressure over the boys was in some of their cases amount to rape, specifically Stan. I can definitely see and respect this interpretation. And looking back on it, I'm starting to wonder whether Stan's aversion was intended to correlate to his tragic death later in the timeline. There is a hint with Stan's interaction with Beverly that he didn't necessarily do and therefore was not liberated from it. That's why the fear of it, Pennywise wise, had him so fear-struck and anxious that he chose to take his life rather than go through all of that again. If you have any points of discussion or other things you'd like to talk about this scene, about it, about the ethics and morals of what can and can't be represented in media, shoot me a comment in the comments below. I'd love to have a little talk with you.